In the early 80s, I lived in Okinawa, Japan. My dad thought that seeing the world would be an adventure that would help my brother and I become better men. And I have to say, I think he was right. Being in the military showed me cultures many would never get to experience, and I am thankful for every experience that life gave to me, even the scary ones. While we lived in Japan, my father wanted us to have a fully immersive experience, so he chose to move us into a small Japanese neighbourhood off base. We lived in a little house at the top of an enormous hill in a cul-de-sac that overlooked, and I kid you not, part of a huge zoo, and on one side a fairly large cemetery. Our particular house was set far above the monkey habitats, about a mile downhill. Between us and those habitats was nothing but thick Indiana Jones style jungle. Jungle the neighbourhood kids and I would tromp through endlessly, ignoring the local warnings about poisonous snakes and ancient untripped mines from World War II. We were the only American family living in that cul-de-sac, completely surrounded by Japanese families, and it was amazing. The kids loved us, and although we couldn't communicate through language very well, we understood each other perfectly. Well, most of the time. Opposite us was an older couple with a lush garden surrounding their property. The older woman wanted us to call her Mama-san, and she had us helping her garden whenever she could coax us over with green tea and chocolate or banana cookies. We loved her. She was so welcoming and generous, as was everyone else actually. We lived in a wonderful neighbourhood. The only drawback to Mama-san's home, however, was that she directly overlooked the cemetery. And that cemetery was unlike any cemetery I had ever seen before. Because Okinawa is an island, burials don't happen very often. Instead, above-ground crypts are built, many of them built into the sides of the hills that make up the island. The crypts are large, made of huge arcs of polished stone set over a large square of that stone, which has a square insert cut into the middle of it for the coffin to be placed inside. Once inside, the square is inset with another piece of polished stone just inside, leaving a kind of shelf on the outside so offerings could be made to lost loved ones. Yen, food, flowers, incense are some of the offerings given. Below Mama-san's house was a valley that swooped back up into another hill opposite her home. That valley and both hills were covered with these crypts and spider webbing up and down through the crypts with various stone step pathways that were old and badly maintained. It was quite a sight. One evening, Mama-san asked me to come visit with her alone. She had something to show me, but it was only for me and the older brother. Intrigued and a bit proud, I agreed. She took me to the back of her garden and sat me on a thick wooden bench that was carved with scenes of fishermen and men with swords, and told me that she had a story to tell. Mama-san then disappeared for a few minutes and soon returned with a tray that held hot green tea and sweet rice cakes. Sitting next to me, she smiled and commented on the colours of the evening sky as the sun began to lower. Mama-san said that she had seen me and my brother and some other kids daring each other to follow a stairway path down into the cemetery. You have to understand, the path from our little home area down the cemetery consisted of hundreds of steps, many broken or cracking, in and out of bushes and at a steep incline. It would be dangerous for anyone, but the real test was seeing how long we could take walking through the crypts at night. Mama-san wanted to explain why that was a bad idea. Many years ago, during the war, Americans were thought to be devils, monsters that would murder innocent citizens for no reason other than to kill. That fear was the product of wartime propaganda used to encourage young men into military service and farmers to fight alongside them. But many didn't. Many ran, and with nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, hundreds of Japanese citizens hurled themselves off a cliffside rather than face torture at the hands of their perceived enemy. I was terrified at hearing this. I had no idea that this had happened. I was mortified and hit with such sadness that I started to cry. The sun was setting and the sky went from pink and blue to a deep orange and red. Mama-san reached out and held my hand, telling me not to worry. This was in the past, and the past is something we must always remember so we never go back. She went on with her story. One young woman had followed through with this sacrifice with her 2 children, but she survived the fall. She was in a coma for months. When she did regain consciousness, she was horrified to realise she was not with her children. They had been buried somewhere in that cemetery below, in an unmarked crypt that held many others. The woman would spend days and nights searching the cemetery, crying in pain, the torment of her loss unbearable, until the day she threw herself into the ocean to hopefully be reunited with her lost family. But they say she never found her children. Her act of suicide doomed her to purgatory. She would remain tortured for eternity. The sun had disappeared, the cemetery drowned in inky blackness, the main path dotted with dim broken lights, feebly illuminating small areas. Mama-san continued. She still wanders the cemetery, looking for her kids. You can hear her crying, and then she pointed down. I didn't want to, but I did. I looked. In the back of the cemetery, in the darkness, there was a white figure. At first a bright white shimmer, moving slowly, kind of shaking. It moved from side to side like it was moving among the crypts, and you could actually hear the crying. It was soft at first, but then low moans and whimpers of pain as it got closer. I was terrified. I wanted to run, but Mama-san held my hand and whispered that she wouldn't come up here. We were too far. But that is why we shouldn't go down there after dark. She said many don't know her story and call her the White Witch, which angers her. It's best to stay away. It's best to pray for her. Mama-san said she comes out to see her often, hoping one day she will find her salvation. Needless to say, I never went down to that cemetery, not once. And I never sat back there with Mama-san again either. That was enough for me. I did, however, visit Suicide Hill. It's called Peace Prayer Park now, out of respect. I cried the whole time we were there. I prayed for all the souls and for forgiveness. So many Japanese citizens spoke to us, welcoming us, telling us stories, sharing with us. I didn't feel worthy, and my love for the country and its people was overwhelming. I'll never forget my time there. I'd like to go back to see if she's still there, wandering the graves, looking for her children. So, when I was in college, many years ago, I used to go for runs really late at night or early in the morning when I would get off work. Not the safest, I know, but I was familiar with the neighbourhood. I knew someone on every block and I switched up the route every day. Anyway, after doing this for many years, you get familiar with the normal late night neighbourhood scene. I knew what cars parked where, what parts of the sidewalk jutted up unexpectedly, who left their porch lights on, who walked their dog really late, who left their TVs glowing, etc, etc. Anyway, there was this one route that I didn't take often because it was the longest, and after a 12-hour long shift I wasn't always up for it. But whenever I did, I knew that I would happen upon this chick and her yellow lab outside her house. Respectfully, to not freak her out, I always crossed to the other side of the street and gave her a friendly wave to let her know that I wasn't an axe murderer or anything. She never waved back or really acknowledged me, and usually, by the time I'd reached the corner, they'd already retreated inside. I didn't think much of it beyond that, at least that is until now. My mother is a landscape designer, and she still lives in our old hood. She was talking to me the other day, and she says that she's designing for that house. I know it's that house because it's really cute, and it's directly across the street from the park or the creek. So, naturally, I asked about the girl that lived there, because I always assumed that she was a nurse, because she was always wearing scrubs when she walked her dog. My mum said that she didn't know, but the people were elderly, so she figured maybe I was referring to the previous owner. Yeah, sure, great. People move, that totally makes sense. But my mum called me the other day. First thing out of her mouth, what did that chick look like? I asked her to be more specific, as we talk all the time and I moan a lot about people, many of them chicks. And she says, the one that you used to see on your runs, outside the house I'm designing. I then went on to describe her as follows, because I remember her vividly. Brown hair, probably medium length, often in a bun or a ponytail. Usually wearing pink or blue scrubs, lean build, not much taller than me, and probably early to mid-20s. My mum was quiet for a minute, then she finally said, so this couple I'm designing for, they're in their 80s, and they had a daughter that was a nurse, who passed away in a car accident on her way home from work when she was 25. My heart dropped out of my arse. My mum continued, that was in 1999. Her name was Megan, and she had a yellow lab named Simon that she walked every night when she got home from her late shift at the hospital. So to clarify, in case you were experiencing some confusion, I was but a wee lass in 1999, and these runs I was taking spanned from like 2009 to 2013. Oh, but wait, there's more. My mum said that the lady told her that she used to leave the porch light on so that her daughter could see her way up to the house easier when she got home from work. Then, when Megan got home, she would take Simon out, and when she was done, she'd shut the light off to signify to her parents in the morning that she had gotten home safely. The dog had been taken out, and she was asleep upstairs. She told my mum that for a short while after her daughter's death, she would turn the light on and out of habit, and she would come out in the morning and it would be off. She said that her husband convinced her that her mind was playing tricks on her, and she never actually turned the light on to begin with, but she said that she always felt like it was her daughter's way of telling her that she was still there with them. Anyway, she thanked my mum and told her to pass along her thanks to me, and my mum and I had a really solid sob session, and now we're trying to settle on a good way to communicate with each other from the beyond, because we feel that a full body apparition is a tall order in the afterlife. Before I begin, I would like to say this story is my truth. It's never left me, and I rarely tell people about it to avoid the inevitable cynicism. Also, to preface this story, this house I was at was a good friend, and I stayed over dozens and dozens of times through my youth. Strange things in small doses happened through the years. Things I brushed off, maybe even would have forgotten if I hadn't reflected so hard after being shaken to the core. Example of this, his parents would be mad at us constantly for leaving the freezer and the fridge cupboard doors open, even on nights we didn't leave his room. Hide and seek, I was sure someone was in the room with me. Room felt usually cold. When I couldn't find anyone, I turned to leave and I felt what seemed like to be a hand on my back. I turned around and nobody was there. We were playing manhunt on a big property, regularly having about 8 to 10 kids playing around for hours. Not once, but twice, with 2 different kids calling the game short and insisting on calling their parents to go home. Both times looking like they were sick or spooked. 4 of us sleeping over after a grade 8 graduation went to bed really late, all agreeing it was time to call it. When we closed our eyes, the whole house stereo system blasted a song from Footloose. Lastly, there were probably other things that aren't worth mentioning, or I even heard stories later of things that other people encountered for which I can't vouch for myself. I would mention something here or there to my friend where he would adamantly tell me not to speak about it, especially while we were present in the house. I was never good at grammar or got good grades in English class growing up, but I'm going to try my best to write this down as best I can. I'm going to finally get this onto pen and paper. Hopefully someone out there will read it and appreciate it for what it is. So I will start the story by saying my friend's, Chris, his house, it was a big mansion. 5 bedrooms with a living maid suite. It had maybe a half a kilometre driveway with a sweet pond out the front and located on Lake Ontario, which is something that will be relevant at the end of the story. One night his parents were away for a wedding. It was just me, Chris and Max. Max is Chris's dog. Max to this day was the most well-trained, well-mannered dog I've ever come across. He was unbelievably smart, aware, and never remember even hearing him bark. We were watching some show or documentary on Aboriginal culture. I think we were laughing at each other imitating some Aboriginal war cry or tribal sounds. We were eating pizza and wings with money his parents left and having a good night. Chris left to put the pizza away and he came back in the room. His energy was different. It was still before 11, which was early for us being home alone teenagers. He just wanted to go to his room and go to bed. Fine, cool, no questions asked. I was laying in bed alone when a sound took my attention to the nightstand on the other side of the bed. I saw a pair of headphones, the kind with small earbuds and wires, slowly moving off, dangling down until gravity took over. It was definitely noticeable enough because I couldn't convince myself that was a situation where it was a weird gravity illusion. Only about 2 inches of the end of the aux cord was hanging over the edge, with the rest of the wire spread across the surface. I watched as if the cord was being pulled down slowly, till enough wire was over the edge and it fell to the ground. Chris entered the room with Max and I hesitantly told him what I had seen, because I know he didn't like me bringing up weird stuff. He reacted strangely, with almost anger, asking me if I'm just messing with him, because he was already spooked. "You're already spooked?" I asked. What he told me freaked me out. He said he was putting away the pizza in the fridge when a 2-litre bottle of Coke on the counter tipped over and rolled off. He went and picked it up, and when he did, the fridge slammed shut. He walked back to the room and said it was time for bed. I told him to chill out and maybe I was just seeing things, and convinced him, and maybe myself, that it was just a weird gravity situation and I must have moved it enough to start the process of falling off when I got into the bed. We calmed down, shut off the lights and got into bed. Within 2 minutes of us in bed chatting away, the lamp on the nightstand on his side turned on. The table lamp was one of the ones where you touch anywhere to turn on and off. We both went silent, looked at each other, then back at the lamp. Before we could get a word in, it turned off. We are both stiff as a board. 10 seconds pass, back on. Now remember calm, reserved, well-trained silent Max? Well, he started growling right in the direction of the nightstand. I've never seen this dog do anything like that in nearly 10 years of knowing him. This maybe lasted 20 seconds, but I can promise you it felt like an eternity, frozen in fear. Then the light turned off. Max runs like a bat out of hell chasing something out of the room. When he sprints out the door, it slams behind him. We hear him running down the stairs and we both went after him. After all, that dog was one of the boys for real. We got to the bottom of the stairs and noticed he went all the way down into the basement. This is where we stopped for a minute. Max is one of the boys, but his basement was scary as hell during the daytime, never mind in this instance. The growling suddenly turned to a loud yelp. Quickly we pleaded in our calls for him to come up, come back. He came very shortly after with his tail quite literally shaking between his legs. We got our shoes on and got the hell out of that place. We walked down the drive with Max and contemplated our next move. Should we go back in? Should we find somewhere else? While looking back at the house from the road, we noticed his bedroom light turn back on so that we could see from the street. That was a big nope. We phoned a friend that was a 20-minute walk away and told him we needed to crash there for the night. But here is the kicker. His father installed cameras over the house for reasons I don't know for sure, but can only assume. Apparently he caught some freaky things, including a night where the fridge, freezer and cabinets in the kitchen all opened at once. I saw this video which exonerated us on the accusations of the past. He told me of shadows and other unpleasant things caught that I have never seen myself, but I can only imagine. Years later, they moved out. His father had sleep apnea that completely disappeared from the first week of being in a new environment. His mother had bad vertigo episodes that never happened ever again. With his father out of denial, he admitted an ugly truth. I forgot to mention early in the story that his family had built this out from the ground up. Early in construction, they discovered what seems to be several burial sites of old human remains. He never reported them in the fear that the project would be put on hold till a full property investigation could take place. It could have been a year delay, and that didn't sound like something he wanted to deal with. This decision took a toll on him, to say the least. I can't help but think that it was weird that the same night we were making fun of an Aboriginal show was the same night we got totally taunted and messed around with. Maybe the ghost was Aboriginal descent. Bones in the area we live in is a common occurrence in new developments. A known area of history, Aboriginal roots, maybe. It's just a theory. This opened me up to a life of investigation about the supernatural and the unknown. I'm not calling people crazy or anything like that. Before that night, I had no interest in the subject other than avoidance. So this happened to me on the 20th of April on the bus. I woke up that morning and thought, today I'm going to take another bus. I want to try a different route. Something I rarely do because I'm a person of habit and I get anxious when I change my routine. So I did. I took the other bus and tried a different route. At 9:20 a.m. on the bus, I met an old man that I actually recognised. His name is Aldo. He is the grandpa of one of my brother's friends. We all know him in the family. He knows my mother, my granddad and everyone else. He owns a greengrocer's. He sells fruit and vegetables. We say hi and talk. He tells me that Alessio, his nephew, is moving to the north of Italy because he found a job there. We talk about how bad the job market is. We complain, we laugh, and then he asks me about my brother. His name and everything. How is he doing? Is he settled? How's mum? Knowing this man, of course, I answered and we talked. Aldo was dressed nicely. He told me that he went to the hospital to grab some certificate and he left the car somewhere because there was traffic. Then he received a call. He had a smartphone. It's important that you know why. You'll see in a moment. And he couldn't quite answer the call at first with his finger. You know that old people usually find it troublesome. Then he called that person back. After 5 minutes or so, I saw that he was getting ready to get off the bus. He told me that the driver already knew that he had to get off right there. So I shook hands with him and he got off, saying goodbye. When I arrived at the destination, around 9:45 a.m, I called Mum and told her who I met on the bus, because we've been friends with this family for years. Long story short, I come back home that night with Mum and my brother asking me what the hell happened. Because she called this old man's daughter, they're good friends, and she asked about Alessio and why he's moving out. I told her that I met Aldo on the bus and he told me all this. But Alessio has no plans of moving out and going to the north of Italy at all. And, also, Aldo had been home the whole morning until 10 a.m. He doesn't even know how to take buses. And he had no business at the hospital at all. So I tell my mother, what the hell are you talking about? I saw him. I talked to him. She shows me a picture of Aldo and says, yes, it's him. I'm telling you, we chatted. Even Aldo's wife was on the phone with me that night and she assured me Aldo was at home with her the whole morning. Also, Aldo doesn't own a car. So I say, well, let's check Aldo's phone. I know he received a call when we were on the bus. And he doesn't own a smartphone. He has one of those old flip style phones because he can't use the modern ones. So who the hell did I talk to? How did he know my brother's name? Why did he ask about my mum? Mind you, Aldo is a sweet old man. It's a pleasure to meet him every now and again at his shop. If it was him on the bus, it's no surprise that he would ask questions. But it was not Aldo. On the 17th of April, it was my birthday. My late grandpa's on the 15th. Could it have been him? He died in 2022 in October. I miss him terribly and think about him all the time. It would be nice if it was you, Grandpa, but it still freaks me out. I can't explain it. In the year 1993, my wife and I, having celebrated just over a year of marriage, found ourselves in search of a new place to call home. A place closer to our parents' abode. Our quest led us to a peculiar rental opportunity, a trailer situated on an 80-acre old hog farm, isolated in the quiet expanse of the countryside. The only companions in this remote setting were our humble trailer and the owner's new home, standing about 200 yards away. A weathered barn stood sentinel nearby, adding a rustic charm to the landscape. The proprietors of this rural haven were a unique duo. The lady, a skilled farrier specialising in fitting new shoes on horses, and the gentleman, a dedicated railroad worker. Their familial ensemble included 2 children, a 14-year-old girl and a young lad of 12. The lady devoted much of her time to the horses in the barn, while the children revelled in the freedom of the outdoors. This was a time long before the internet and the conveniences of modern communication. A time when descriptions and connections lacked the immediacy we now take for granted. Not long after settling into this seemingly serene abode, I began to notice anomalies that defied explanation. It's crucial to note that my childhood had been marred by encounters with spirits, and as these inexplicable events unfolded, I found myself confiding in my wife that we might have unwittingly chosen a haunted home. While she believed in spirits, she had never personally experienced the paranormal. The disturbances became incessant, nocturnal. It mattered not. The spirits asserted their presence. Doors would slam shut, others would swing open, and cabinets would mysteriously fly open, tossing objects off the countertops. As time passed, the disturbances escalated, reaching a point where my wife was chased by a sickly raccoon into our trailer one evening. In an attempt to alleviate the situation, I set a live trap baited with cat food and within an hour had captured the ailing creature. Confronted with the decision to spare the raccoon further suffering, I retrieved a .22 caliber handgun and from a foot away delivered what I believed to be a humane end. The next morning, expecting to find a lifeless creature, I was instead met with the raccoon standing calmly, appearing surprisingly healthy. Perplexed, I transported it miles away and released it, unwilling to let it linger near our home. Despite the absence of contemporary technology to document these paranormal events, we adapted and lived with the strange occurrences. One particular unsettling episode transpired as an otherworldly force seemed to settle upon the trees surrounding our home. The sound of breaking branches echoed through the night, prompting me to rush outside, only to witness an abrupt silence as soon as I stepped through the door. This bizarre phenomenon repeated twice more that night, each time ceasing upon my emergence. Frustrated by the unexplainable disturbances, I resolved to approach the owners with a direct inquiry about the supernatural. In 1993, the understanding of the paranormal was not as commonplace as it is today. So nervously, I broached the subject with the lady owner, and to my surprise, she confirmed a dark history. 3 individuals, an old man and his 2 sons, had met their demise in separate farming accidents on the property before the current owners acquired it. So now, armed with this unsettling knowledge, the subsequent weeks were fraught with eerie incidents. There was lights flickering, doors slamming, and an ever-growing sense of foreboding. The property, once serene, now emanated a palpable darkness, an ominous presence that seemed to shroud everything in a sinister aura. The stage was set for the chilling climax. The final night in the trailer, built in the 70s, the trailer boasted windows on 3 walls in the master bedroom, beginning halfway up the wall. Accustomed to lying on the right side of the bed against the wall, we retired for the night as usual. The spirits, however, were undeterred, orchestrating a series of unsettling activities, opening doors, regardless of locks, and escalating their usual antics. As we lay in the pitch-black darkness, a mere 5 minutes had passed before an unexplained force compelled me to open my eyes, and to my horror, I found myself staring out of the windows. The bed was elevated 3 feet above the floor. Simultaneously, my wife, who hadn't yet fallen asleep, began screaming. The bed crashed down with such force that all 4 legs pierced the trailer's floor. Now, as a 6'3" military man weighing 230 pounds, I considered myself tough. But this humbling experience shattered that illusion. The instinct to let my wife go first was overshadowed by sheer panic as we crawled and struggled over each other, desperately escaping the trailer. Grabbing my keys, we ran to the truck, only to find it unresponsive, as if the battery had died. Terrified, we heard the haunting sound of breaking trees once again. In a moment of desperation, prayer became our refuge. After what felt like an eternity, I turned the key once more, and miraculously, the truck roared to life. Fleeing to my parents' home, we sought solace and prayed through the night, repeating the ritual for the next 3 nights until I secured a condo in town. Our return to the trailer, accompanied by 2 trucks and 2 trailers, was a swift retrieval mission. We gathered our belongings and never looked back. This harrowing experience ignited a fervour within me to delve into the mysteries of the paranormal. Over the past 30 years, I've dedicated myself to helping others haunted by the unknown. Despite my encounters with war and a tumultuous life, this remains the most terrifying event etched into my memory. Even as I conduct paranormal investigations, I steadfastly refuse to return to that cursed property. Those of us drawn to the paranormal often find ourselves in the kind of deep, unusual conversations that rarely happen in everyday life. As someone who seems to attract these interactions more than most, I'm well used to the standard fare, unexplained bumps in the night, sudden cold spots, or the classic shadowy silhouette moving just out of sight. But occasionally, something is shared with me that really creeps me out. This time, it found me in the form of some very old family folklore. The report that follows comprises a chilling prediction, a catastrophic event, and a family secret passed down through the decades, serving as a harsh warning against messing around with things that should be best left well alone. A very talented musician and a good friend of mine, Josh English, recently shared this account with me. It's a massive piece of lore in his family, and a story that his nan used to tell with absolute seriousness. While most of our nans warned us about the everyday dangers of playing too close to deep water or crossing busy roads, Josh's nan had a very different, far darker danger she wanted him to be cautious of. The exact dates of what followed have been lost to time. While deep archival research might uncover the hard facts, for this report we are going to focus purely on the chilling folklore itself. Josh's nan sadly passed away a couple of years ago, taking the finer details with her to the next place. But to set the scene, this sequence of events unfolded sometime in the 1940s. We are looking at Josh's great-granddad, Joseph, and his great-nan, Jane. They had a young daughter together named Elizabeth, who would later become Josh's beloved nan. Before Joseph met Jane, he had been married previously and had a daughter from that relationship called Caroline. From what Josh's family remembers, Caroline usually lived with her biological mother. However, for a period of a few weeks during the 1940s, she came to stay with Joseph, Jane, and little Elizabeth. If you've ever navigated the complexities of a blended family, you know how high tensions can run. Jane and her stepdaughter Caroline were no exception and simply did not get along, clashing constantly under the same roof. The atmosphere in the house grew thick with resentment, and Jane was rapidly reaching her breaking point. She desperately wanted Caroline to return to her mother's, but time seemed to drag. As each day slowly rolled past, the energy within her home grew suffocatingly heavy. An unexpected message that Jane needed to vent. She was rapidly reaching her wit's end. She decided to invite some friends over one evening to clear the air and restore a little normality to her everyday life. They had the house to themselves and were complaining, gossiping, and sharing a much-needed laugh. Things were finally beginning to feel normal again. Then, whether out of boredom, morbid curiosity, or just the spiritualism of the area, someone suggested indulging in something a little more taboo. Let's turn down the lights, close the curtains, and get out a Ouija board. At first, it wasn't exactly what you'd expect. Nothing profound happened. It was entirely light-hearted, just a bit of a parlour game while they sat around chatting about random things. Someone asked a silly question, and the board spelt out an equally silly answer. Eyes narrowed and smiles widened around the table as they playfully tried to guess who was pushing the planchette. But then, Jane asked a specific question. Frustrated by her living situation and feeling a sudden spike of anger, she spoke out loud. "When will the daughter be gone?" She meant it purely in a physical sense. When would Caroline finally pack her bags and go back home? Nothing happened. She asked a second time. The same stillness followed. The atmosphere in the room started to tighten, her friends noticing the shifting energy. A few snidey remarks were thrown around the table at whoever was supposedly pushing the planchette. "Not so brave now, are we? Has Jane scared you?" Followed by some giggling, everyone assuming the group's prankster had just lost their nerve. But Jane wasn't laughing. She had become focused on the board. She asked for a third time, this time with conviction in her voice. That was the moment the energy in the room turned ice cold. Josh said his nan described it as an instant, full-blooded chill hitting everyone at the same time. The planchette, which had just been lazily sliding around spelling out jokes, violently darted across the board with everyone's fingers still glued to it. It spelt out, "She will be gone soon." The light-hearted vibe completely vanished. Everyone was instantly unnerved. It felt wrong. It felt dark. They immediately packed the board away, mutually agreeing that they had more than enough of that game for one night, and it was probably best just to leave the evening there. Okay, so by the next morning, Jane had convinced herself to dismiss the entire ordeal as a prank in terrible taste. She rationalised that someone at the table must have been harbouring a grudge against her, and she'd have to do some digging later to find out who it was and why. However, just a few days later, the message on the board started to bleed into the physical world. An emergency situation arose back at Caroline's mother's house. Details on what the emergency was are lost to history, but it was urgent enough that Caroline had to get home immediately. Given the urgency and the distances involved back then, she was booked onto a flight. The family travelled down to the airport to see her off. Joseph and Jane stood watching as Caroline boarded the plane. I tried to imagine what was going through Jane's mind at that moment. relief that her stepdaughter was finally leaving, or a lingering, uneasy memory of the board's rapid spelling just days prior. The plane began to lift off the runway. A cruel coincidence as it was at this point, right before their eyes, that disaster decided to strike. The plane suffered a catastrophic engine failure. It completely lost power, dropped out of the sky, and crashed right near the airport. Caroline was tragically killed in the wreckage. Just days after, the Ouija board emphatically promised Jane that the girl would be gone soon. She was dead. When Josh finished telling me this story, I was genuinely creeped out. Naturally, my first instinct was to put on my researcher hat and start digging into the few facts that I had to go on. But here is where the story gets frustrating, and a tad more mysterious. Without exact marriage certificates, death records, deep genealogy files, and unrestricted access to historical aviation crash databases, unearthing the hard truth of that day is almost impossible. We also need to factor in the age of the story and how perception can change over time. During the 1940s, civilian air travel was heavily restricted due to the war. If Caroline was placed on a small, privately chartered flight, an emergency military ferry, or if she was travelling under her mother's maiden name instead of her father's surname, the official records would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to track down today. Furthermore, as stories are passed down through 80 years of family history, the exact decade or the mode of transport can sometimes shift. Details are lost as the memory begins to fade, but the core trauma remains. The lack of definitive proof makes this story 10 times scarier in my opinion. It elevates it from a tragic historical fact to a deeply personal, chilling piece of folklore. It's a tragedy that slipped through the cracks of the official archives, living purely in the memory of the family who experienced it. One thing, though, is certain. To those who witnessed the tragedy unfold before their own eyes, it was absolutely real. My friend Josh believes this story to be absolutely authentic. To this day, Josh's family has one golden, unbreakable rule. Do not mess around with Ouija boards. The trauma of that prediction was drilled into his nan, who drilled it into her children, who passed it down to Josh. That warning is still spoken about today, nearly a century on from its author. Reflecting on it all, I can't help but wonder, did the board simply predict an unavoidable tragedy? Or, in a moment of anger and frustration, did Jane unknowingly invite something much darker to intervene and grant her wish in the most horrific way possible? Have you or your family ever experienced a prediction that came true in the worst possible way? Please let me know.